Kelti and the Owl. One Saturday afternoon, Kelti was thinking of something fun to do when her mummy said to her, "Why don't you go outside and play with Dougie? I can make you a picnic to take with you for your tea." "Yes, please, mummy," said Kelti excitedly. "That's a great idea." "Go and fetch the picnic basket and blanket from the garage while I make you a sandwich," her mummy said, going in the kitchen to get the picnic ready. Kelti went into the garage and collected the picnic basket and blanket, and then grabbed her jacket as she headed back to the kitchen. Her mummy placed all the food inside the basket, along with some napkins, and then covered it all over with a tea towel. Shutting the lid of the basket, she handed it to her excited daughter. "Have a lovely time, darling," her mummy said as she kissed her lovingly. "I will, mummy," replied Kelti, picking up the blanket along with the basket. "Thank you for the picnic. See you later." And she went out of the back door and into the garden with Dougie following behind. "Come on, Dougie, let's go into the forest and sit by the big oak tree. It is so pretty there." Dougie followed Kelti into the forest, and they walked along the path leading to the big oak tree. As they walked, Kelti enjoyed hearing the sounds of the different bird calls. She recognised some of them. There was a wood pigeon, some pheasants, a woodpecker, a cuckoo, a kestrel, and there was also an owl hooting, which she thought was a little unusual this time of the day. Suddenly, the owl flew in front of her and perched on a tree branch just above her head. She was a tiny owl with pretty brown and cream feathers and piercing yellow eyes. Getting closer to the owl, Kelti noticed that the owl was not afraid of her, but allowed her to get up really close. As Kelti put her hand out to pet the owl hooted and flew off. She landed on another tree a little way ahead in the direction Kelti was going. "I think she wants us to follow her," Kelti said to Dougie. "Let's go, but no barking. We don't want to scare her." Kelti and Dougie followed the little owl. Every time they got close to the tree she perched in, she hooted and flew off to the next tree a little way ahead. Eventually, the owl reached the oak tree and settled on a branch of a small wild cherry tree just beside it. Looking at Kelti, the little owl hooted, as if to say, "Come here." Kelti put the picnic basket and blanket on the ground next to the big oak tree and told Dougie to sit there and stay while she went over to the cherry tree to see the cherry tree that the little owl was perched in. "What is it?" she asked gently. "How can I help you?" She noticed that the owl was sitting in front of a nest. Kelti looked into the nest expecting to see 1 or 2 eggs, but there was nothing in there. Puzzled, Kelti wondered what the owl was trying to tell her. Looking around, she saw, laying on the ground at the bottom of the cherry tree, a tiny little egg. "Is this what you are trying to tell me?" Kelti asked the owl. "Your egg has fallen out of your nest." Bending down, Kelti picked up the perfect egg and noticed it felt so cold. "Let me try and keep it warm for you," said Kelti, as the owl hooted in reply. She walked over to the picnic basket, carrying the tiny egg very carefully. She unpacked all of the food her mummy had put inside. Then, taking the tea towel which had covered the food, she made a little cocoon and placed the egg inside. Then she laid a few napkins over the top of the egg and closed the lid to the basket. The owl flew over and perched on a branch in the oak tree and watched as Kelti lovingly took care of her egg. Looking up at the owl, Kelti said, "Let's leave your egg in the basket for a while to get it warm again. It will be safe in there. I'll make sure of that." The owl hooted, as if to say thank you, and then flew to a branch a little lower and closer to the basket. "Okay, Dougie," said Kelti, looking at him, sniffing the picnic food she had taken out of the basket. "Let's see what Mummy has packed for us." Laying the blanket flat on the ground, Kelti sat down upon it and sorted the goodies which lay before her. There were ham sandwiches cut into tiny triangles, small bite-sized pieces of cheese, tiny cherry tomatoes, and a bag of her favourite cheese and onion crisps. At the bottom of the basket was a little bag labelled "For Dougie." Kelti opened it, and inside were some little sausages, the perfect size for a tiny dog. Finally, there was a bottle of water with a cup for Kelti and a bowl for Dougie. "Come on, Dougie, let's enjoy our picnic. Tuck in, boy," she said as she laid his sausages on the blanket. After they had eaten their fill, Kelti felt like taking a nap. She looked over at Dougie and saw he was already comfy, curled up in a ball after eating his delicious sausages. "Let's take a quick nap," she said to him. 10 minutes won't hurt." As she lay down and made herself comfortable, she glanced up to make sure the owl was still sitting and watching the basket. Seeing that she was, Kelti fell asleep. Suddenly, she heard a noise in the bushes. Looking over at them, she saw nothing, but heard the bushes rustle again. Now the bushes seemed to be moving. There was something in them, and it was moving closer to her. "Dougie, quickly," she whispered as loud as she dared, whilst grabbing the picnic basket and running behind the big oak tree. Feeling a little braver behind the big oak tree, Kelti peered around it and saw a fox creeping out of the bushes. The fox was looking directly at the owl sitting on the low branch of the oak tree. All too quickly, before Kelti had time to warn the owl, as quick as a flash, the fox ran towards the owl and leapt into the air with his mouth open wide, showing his big, white, razor-sharp teeth. Kelti closed her eyes as his teeth shut tightly around the little owl. With a painful hoot, that was the last sound the owl made. Kelti opened her eyes just in time to see the fox heading back into the bushes with owl feathers floating down behind him. Coming out from behind the big oak tree, Kelti started to cry as she realised there was nothing that she could do for the poor owl. Laying back down on the blanket, she cuddled Dougie and started to dream about her poor little friend, the owl. She heard in the distance. She heard again. Opening her eyes, Kelti looked up, and there above her, on a branch in the oak tree, was the little owl. "You're okay," said Kelti, relieved. "The fox didn't eat you after all." Again, the owl hooted. And then Kelti realised it had all been a dream. The fox hadn't come and grabbed the owl. She had dreamt it all. Feeling very happy about this, Kelti watched the owl again. The owl said, and Kelti realised she wanted her to look in the basket. Kelti lifted the lid to the basket and then carefully removed the napkins from the top of the egg. To her surprise, the egg was starting to hatch. There were tiny cracks in it, and she could hear the baby owl inside banging at the shell with its beak. Suddenly, before her eyes, the shell cracked open enough for the baby owl to appear. "Oh, how wonderful," whispered Kelti. "Hello, baby owl. Welcome to the world." Lifting the baby owl carefully out of its shell, Kelti carried it over to the nest the mummy owl was now sitting by. Just then, Mummy Owl flew away, and Kelti thought she had upset her. But within a few seconds, she was back with a tiny, fresh worm she had found for her baby. Kelti sat back on her blanket with Dougie and watched the owls together. "How magical this is, Dougie," she said, smiling. "A perfect end to a lovely afternoon." After a few minutes, Kelti started to put the leftovers from her picnic back into the picnic basket. "Come on, Dougie," she said as she rolled up the blanket. "Let's leave them to get to know each other. It's time for us to go home." With one last look at the owls, Kelti and Dougie made their way back through the forest and into her garden. Once inside the kitchen, Kelti went to wash her hands while her mummy unpacked the picnic basket. "Where has this come from, Kelti?" she asked, holding up her beautiful brown and cream owl feather. Oh, that's from my new friend I made today in the forest, replied Kelti, taking the feather from her mummy. It's my new piece of treasure, she said, smiling, as she heard her friend hoot in the distance.